Sir, the homeowner is refusing to comply with our notice. I've explained the HOA rules, but he won't back down. How would you like me to proceed?
Proceed with enforcement.
I'm not admitting to a violation that doesn't exist.
I've followed every HOA rule, every permit requirement, and every property guideline.
HOA president tried to break into my shed 7 times. Then the FBI arrested her at her own meeting. I need to report a suspected drug operation at 1847 Ridgeline Drive. That's what the HOA president told Forsyth County Code Enforcement. She described my workshop, the one I built with a legal county permit so I could restore my late wife's dream car, as a chemical storage hazard, a fire risk, and a danger to the children in the neighborhood. The county inspector came out, looked around, and found a 1969 Camaro on a lift, a wall of socket wrenches, a rolling tool chest, and a half-used can of Bondo. 0 violations. But what the inspector didn't find was the real operation. That operation was happening 2 houses away, in the HOA president's own garage. 50 stolen vehicles, car carriers arriving after midnight with their headlights off, tarps covering VIN-swapped inventory, a chop shop hidden behind an 8-foot cedar privacy fence. And the reason she kept targeting my shed had nothing to do with chemicals, safety, or community standards. It was because my cameras were catching hers. She filed 7 complaints. She hired a fake inspector. She sent a locksmith to break into my workshop. She cut my power. She lied to the county. She manipulated the HOA board. And when none of that worked, she tried to use a teenage kid to steal my shed keys. All because she was terrified that the footage in my workshop would expose what her husband was doing in their garage. And in the end, it all came crashing down in the Ridgeline Estates Community Center on a Thursday night, in front of the same neighbors she'd spent 9 years controlling. So let me ask you this. What would you do if the person harassing you the hardest wasn't trying to stop you from doing something wrong, but trying to stop you from seeing what they were doing? My name is Garrett Thorne, and this started in the spring of 2021, about 8 months after my wife, Nora, died of pancreatic cancer. She was 44. We had been together since college, married 19 years. And toward the end, when the medication blurred most of her words and the pain stole entire afternoons from her, there was one thing she could still talk about clearly: a 1969 Camaro SS in Hugger Orange. We found that car when we were 26, rotting in a barn outside Dalton, Georgia. The floor pans were shot. The rear quarter panels were rusted through. The interior smelled like mold and old mouse nests. There was more Bondo than steel in one of the doors. The owner wanted $3,000 for it, and we paid him in cash because even in that condition, we knew what it could become. We made a promise that day. One day, when life slowed down, we'd restore it together. Then life did what life does. Jobs got demanding, bills stacked up. The kids needed braces. The water heater broke. The roof leaked. The mortgage always came first. The Camaro sat in storage under a tarp while the years moved faster than we thought they would. Then Nora got diagnosed. And once that happened, a car didn't matter at all. At least that's what I told myself. After the funeral, I sold the house in Marietta. Every room in that place held too much history. Not bad history, good history, which somehow hurt worse. Her coffee mug still on the shelf. Her throw blanket folded over the couch arm. The little note she left in the junk drawer telling me not to throw away the important batteries, like that was a category of thing only she understood. I couldn't stay there. So I moved north, to Forsyth County, to a gated subdivision called Ridgeline Estates, about 40 minutes outside Atlanta, depending on traffic and whether Georgia drivers had decided lanes were optional that day. The house itself wasn't anything special. 3 bedrooms, 1 story, half-acre lot, detached 2-car garage. But the backyard was perfect. Flat ground, shade from 2 huge water oaks, room enough to build a proper workshop. I'm a fleet maintenance engineer for a regional trucking company. I fix things for a living. Engines, hydraulic systems, electrical faults, stubborn mechanical problems no one else wants to chase. I understand machines better than I understand most people. And 3 months after I moved in, I pulled a legal county permit and built the workshop I'd been imagining for years. 580 square feet, steel structure, insulated walls, concrete pad, industrial shelving, a second-hand lift I bought from a shop in Macon that was going out of business, bright LED lighting overhead, a ventilation setup safe enough for welding fumes and paint work. It wasn't just a shed, it was a place to breathe again. I had the Camaro hauled out of storage, rolled into the workshop, and set up on the lift. That first evening, I remember standing there in the doorway after I'd closed up for the night, looking at the car under the white lights, and feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Grief is strange. It doesn't just make you sad, it makes you untethered. Like the world is continuing to turn, but you're half a step behind it, watching everyone else keep pace while you figure out how to carry something invisible and crushing at the same time. But out in that workshop, with a ratchet in one hand and classic rock playing low through an old radio, grief got quieter. Not gone. Never gone. Just quieter. And for a little while each evening, I could focus on something that made sense. A seized bolt either comes loose or it doesn't. A panel is either square or it isn't. An engine either fires or it doesn't. Machines are honest that way. People aren't. I met Brenda Calloway in my first week. I was unloading lumber for the workshop frame when a white Cadillac Escalade rolled up slow enough to make it clear the driver expected to be noticed. Brenda stepped out like she was arriving at a campaign event. Blonde hair pinned up, linen blazer, yoga pants, expensive sunglasses, clipboard under one arm like she was carrying official state business. She smiled, but not warmly, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Welcome to Ridgeline Estates," she said. "I'm Brenda Calloway, HOA president, 9 years. She said it with the weight some people attach to titles, like the words themselves should change your posture. I introduced myself. She glanced past me at the lumber stacked near the backyard and said, "Just so you know, any exterior modifications need board approval before construction begins. We keep tight standards here." I told her I appreciated the heads up and that I'd already filed my permit with the county. She lowered her sunglasses enough to look at me directly. "The county doesn't run this neighborhood, Mr. Thorne," she said. "I do." That was day one. And if you've ever dealt with someone like Brenda, you know exactly the type. There are people who want to lead. Then there are people who want to control. Brenda wasn't interested in helping a neighborhood function well. She liked the power of deciding what everyone else was allowed to do. Over the next few weeks, I learned the lay of the land. Brenda had been HOA president since 2013. Her husband, Dwayne, owned a used car dealership off Highway 9 called Callaway Premier Motors. They lived 2 houses up from me, in the biggest property on our stretch of the subdivision. 5 bedrooms, oversized lot, 6-bay detached garage tucked behind a tall cedar fence with a motorized gate. Dwayne drove a black GMC Denali and acted like eye contact was a tax bracket issue. Brenda waved at everyone, but not kindly. Her wave had authority in it. It was the wave of someone who expected acknowledgement. No one challenged her. No one pushed back. Neighbors grumbled in private, but not in public. There were stories about fines that didn't make sense, fees that rose without explanation, landscaping citations that seemed selectively enforced, and board votes that somehow always went Brenda's way. But nobody had ever really stood up to her, until I built a workshop she couldn't get into. The first letter came 3 weeks after construction finished. Gold-bordered HOA letterhead. Ridgeline Estates logo embossed at the top. Her name beneath it in bold print. Office of the President. It looked less like neighborhood correspondence and more like something issued by a local dictatorship with flower beds. The letter said my unauthorized commercial structure violated community standards under Section 4.7 of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. Effective immediately, I was being fined $200 per day until the structure was removed or brought into compliance through board-approved inspection. $200 a day for a permitted workshop on my own property. Now here's the thing about HOAs. Most people sign the paperwork at closing and never read it again. I did. I sat down with a coffee that went cold beside me and read every page of the CC&Rs, line by line. Section 4.7 covered accessory structures. Specifically, detached outbuildings over 600 square feet required prior board approval. Mine was 580, 20 square feet under the threshold, which meant Brenda had no basis to fine me under that section at all. Not a gray area, not a maybe, not a matter of interpretation, just wrong. And if you ever deal with an HOA, remember this. They can only enforce what's actually written in the governing documents. They don't get to invent restrictions because they don't like you. So I responded politely. I attached a copy of the county building permit. I attached a copy of the covenants with section 4.7 highlighted. I explained, clearly and respectfully, that the workshop was under the size threshold and that the fine had no legal basis. Then I mailed it certified, return receipt requested, because if there's one thing I believe in almost as much as torque specs, it's a paper trail. Brenda didn't answer with a letter. She answered with a person. 3 days later at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, my doorbell rang. I was in the workshop sanding the Camaro's driver's side door panel when I heard it. I wiped my hands on a rag, came around front, and found a man in khakis and a polo standing on my porch with a clipboard. He introduced himself as a certified HOA compliance inspector. That phrase alone was enough to set my teeth on edge. He said he was there to conduct a mandatory safety review of my accessory structure. I asked for ID. He gave me a business card with no company name, just the words "Compliance Services" and a phone number. I asked for written authorization from the HOA board. He said Brenda had called him directly. I asked for a copy of the board resolution authorizing the inspection. He didn't have one. Then he shifted his weight and tried a softer tone. "Sir, I just need to see inside the shed and take a few photos. It'll only take 10 minutes. I told him I appreciated his time, but without proper written notice, formal board authorization, and actual legal authority, he wasn't stepping foot on my property. Then I took out my phone and started recording. He left in less than 90 seconds. Later that evening, I did a little digging. There is no recognized credential in Georgia called Certified HOA Compliance Inspector. That title doesn't exist, which meant Brenda had sent some guy, maybe a handyman, maybe a friend, maybe somebody's cousin with a polo shirt and free Tuesday morning, to pretend he had authority he didn't have. That was attempt number 1, and it told me something important. She wasn't trying to resolve a rules issue. She was trying to get access. That same night, I reviewed my security footage. I'd installed 4 cameras when I built the workshop, 2 covering the shed, 1 the driveway, 1 the back gate. I had expensive tools inside, plus a car that meant more to me than money could measure. The camera footage showed the fake inspector arriving in a silver Nissan Altima, but he didn't park in front of my house. He parked 2 houses down. Then he walked up, glanced at the workshop padlock multiple times, and rang the bell. That little detail mattered. He wasn't curious about code compliance, he was focused on the lock. I backed up the video, printed a still frame, and started a folder. The label on the folder was simple: Brenda. At the time, I thought it might end there. It didn't. 2 weeks later, attempt number 2 showed up with tools. I had taken a half day from work to pick up an intake manifold from a shop in Dawsonville. When I pulled into my driveway around 2:15 that afternoon, I saw a white van parked beside my house. A man was kneeling in front of my workshop door with a pick gun in his hand. He looked up when he heard my truck and froze. His name was Lyle Hatcher, licensed locksmith out of Cumming. He had a work order clipped to a board. I asked to see it. The work order said, Ridgeline Estates HOA Emergency Access Unit, 1847 detached structure. Authorized by B. Calloway, HOA president. I stood there looking at it for a second, trying to decide whether I was more angry or impressed by the nerve. He told me Brenda had informed him the homeowner was out of town and there was a water leak inside the structure. I said, "I'm the homeowner. I'm not out of town, and there's no plumbing in that building." The color drained out of his face. He looked at the workshop, looked at me, looked back at the paper. Like maybe, if he stared hard enough, the lie would somehow rewrite itself. It didn't. I called the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Jennings arrived about 17 minutes later. Tall guy, quiet, wrote everything down in a little notebook, like he trusted paper more than memory. I showed him the work order. I showed him the untouched lock. I showed him the pick gun sitting on the concrete. Deputy Jennings explained to Lyle, very clearly, that an HOA president does not have the authority to order a locksmith to open a homeowner's detached structure without consent. He told him that if he had gone through with it, he could have found himself caught up in criminal trespass charges right alongside the person who hired him. Lyle apologized about 6 times in 2 minutes, gathered his tools, and left looking like a man rethinking several career decisions at once. That was attempt number 2, and it was no longer just harassment. It was an attempted unlawful entry using deception. I filed a formal incident report, added it to the folder, and that night, sitting in the workshop with the overhead door cracked open to let in some air, I had a feeling I couldn't shake. Brenda wasn't going to stop. People like her don't process resistance as a boundary. They process it as an insult. And the more you frustrate them, the more determined they become to reassert control. Attempt number 3 came at 1:47 in the morning. I was asleep when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the back gate camera. I opened the app, expecting maybe a raccoon or a stray cat or some kid cutting through a yard. Instead, I watched a woman in a dark jacket slip through my gate and head straight for the workshop. She grabbed the padlock with both hands and yanked. Hard. Then again. Then a third time, bracing her foot against the door. The camera had a clean angle on her face, blonde hair spilling from a hood, oversized sunglasses shoved up onto her forehead. Brenda Calloway, HOA president, in my backyard, at almost 2 in the morning, trying to rip the lock off my workshop with her bare hands. She tugged on it for maybe a minute and a half before giving up. Then she stepped back, looked around, and walked out the same way she came in. But while I was watching all this, something else in the background caught my eye. Past the fence line, on the street near the Calloway property, I could see the shape of a vehicle moving slowly in the dark. A flatbed carrier. No headlights, no running lights, gliding into their driveway like it didn't want witnesses. At the time, I told myself it could have been dealership business. Late delivery, maybe. Dwayne sold cars. Strange hours weren't impossible. Still, I saved that clip too. New padlock the next day, heavier grade, and a note in my folder that said, Brenda on property, 1:47 a.m. Carrier at Calloway residence, lights off. That note would matter later. Then Brenda went official. Attempt number 4 arrived by certified county mail. A formal complaint had been filed with Forsyth County Code Enforcement, alleging that my workshop contained hazardous chemical storage and posed a fire risk to adjacent homes. Anonymous complaint. But the language gave her away. It had that same pompous rhythm her HOA letters always had. Accessory structure. Community safety concern. Unauthorized modification. The county inspector who came out was a guy named Donaldson. Steel-toed boots, hard hat, practical attitude. He asked to see inside the workshop. I said absolutely, and opened everything. He checked the electrical panel, looked at the ventilation setup, opened cabinets, inspected shelving, saw cans of paint, brake fluid, motor oil, body filler, solvents. All normal, all stored correctly. He spent maybe 20 minutes looking around, then signed his form and said, "You've got a cleaner shop than most commercial garages I inspect. 0 violations." Before he left, he lowered his voice and said, "Someone really doesn't like this shed, huh?" I asked for a copy of the report. Then the next morning, I filed an open records request to see the original complaint information. A week later, the county's response came back. The complaint had been submitted through the county portal under the name Concerned Resident, Ridgeline Estates. The email used was a throwaway Gmail account, but the IP address tied back to a device registered under the Ridgeline Estates HOA business account. That's when I realized Brenda wasn't even bothering to be careful anymore. She thought nobody would challenge her. She thought nobody would know how. She thought the title itself would shield her. Then she did something that turned this from ugly to dangerous. Attempt number 5 was the power. I got home from work one Friday evening and the house was dead. No lights, no air conditioning, no refrigerator hum, no Wi-Fi, no camera feed, no alarm panel glow, nothing. And if you've never had your power shut off in Georgia in July, let me paint the picture. Imagine stepping into a house that has become a sealed, humid oven. The air doesn't just feel hot, it feels wet, stale, hostile, like the walls are sweating. I called Georgia Power. After too much hold music and too many transfers, a supervisor told me that an authorized representative of Ridgeline Estates HOA had reported an electrical safety concern tied to my address and requested emergency service disconnection pending inspection. I asked who the representative was. She read the name off the file, Brenda Calloway. I told the supervisor there had been no inspection, no emergency, no electrical problem, and that the HOA had no authority to request disconnection of my private utility service. She put me on hold again. Then she came back and said service would be restored within 4 hours and the account would be flagged. 4 hours, which meant my cameras had already been offline for 6 hours of blind time. 6 hours where somebody could have walked right up to my property and I would have no footage. That was the first time I stopped thinking in terms of HOA abuse and started thinking in terms of criminal intent. Because who needs your power off that badly? Who benefits from your security system going dark? I pulled the last footage before the outage. On the driveway camera, at 4:12 that morning, Brenda's white Escalade pulled up near the neighborhood electrical junction. She got out, opened the panel, made a phone call. 20 minutes later, my service was disconnected. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was deliberate. And now I had video of her physically locating my feed before the fraudulent shutoff request. That same afternoon, I went to the hardware store and bought a solar-powered trail camera with cellular backup, mounted it under the eave of the workshop roof, angled so it could see both the workshop door and the street behind the fence line. No wires, no dependence on the house current, no way for Brenda to kill it by calling the power company. If she wanted that camera gone, she'd have to come onto my property and remove it herself. And by then, it would already have sent me her face. That trail cam changed everything, because for the first week, I was watching for Brenda. Instead, I found Dwayne. Monday night, 1:32 a.m., a white car carrier backed into the Calloway driveway and disappeared through the gate toward the 6-bay garage. 40 minutes later, it rolled out empty. Wednesday, 2:15 a.m., another carrier, same route, same timing. Friday, 12:50 a.m., covered flatbed with 2 vehicles under tarps. It entered, loaded, left, unloaded. By the end of 7 days, I had 11 separate nighttime carrier arrivals at the Calloway property. 11. I sat in the workshop one night, replaying footage on my laptop while the Camaro sat quiet on the lift behind me, and the whole thing finally clicked. Brenda didn't care about my workshop. She cared about my line of sight. My cameras had a clear view of the entrance to her property from the angle behind my fence. Every late-night delivery, every carrier, every tarp-covered arrival, every suspicious unload. My hard drives had been building a time-stamped archive of her husband's operation. That was why she wanted inside. Not to inspect, to erase. All 7 moves made sense at once. The fake inspector, the locksmith, the midnight break-in, the county complaint, the utility fraud, the whispering, the obsession with access. She wasn't enforcing community standards. She was trying to destroy evidence. I called my neighbor Clay Burgess. Clay lived 3 houses down and had been in Ridgeline Estates since it was built. Retired master plumber, 62 years old, quiet, capable, and the kind of man who fixed things for people without announcing he'd done it. I asked him if he'd noticed trucks coming and going from the Callaway place late at night. There was a pause. Then he said, "Garrett, I've been hearing those trucks for 2 years." He told me he'd assumed Dwayne was moving dealership inventory. I said, "What if it's not dealership inventory?" Another pause, longer this time. Then he said, "Then somebody needs to make a phone call." I told him about the carriers, the tarps, the lights off, the repeated deliveries. He listened without interrupting. Then he said something I still remember exactly. "You ever notice how small that lot of his is on Highway 9? But somehow, he's always got inventory? I always thought that was a hell of a lot of cars for a 3-man operation." He was right. A tiny used car lot doesn't move that kind of volume. Not legitimately, not through a residential garage after midnight. I made a legal pad list that night. What I had. Video of 11 late-night carrier arrivals over 7 days. Timestamps. Partial plate images from 2 trucks. Visual confirmation of vehicles arriving under tarps and leaving unloaded. A neighbor who had heard suspicious activity for years. What I didn't have, proof the cars were stolen. No VINs, no registration records, no direct access to the Callaway property. No hard evidence that would let me accuse somebody publicly without risking everything, which meant I needed someone with actual investigative power. Most people don't know this, but you can report suspected vehicle theft operations without going through local gossip channels, neighborhood Facebook pages, or even your local police first. So I called the National Insurance Crime Bureau. I gave them everything. The address, the dealership connection, the repeated nighttime carrier traffic, the footage times, the partial plates, the suspicious behavior, the fact that the HOA president seemed desperate to gain access to the cameras recording it all. The intake agent listened for 12 straight minutes without interrupting. At the end, she assigned a case number and said someone would be in touch. 5 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID said, U.S. Department of Justice. Special Agent Whitfield introduced himself as part of an auto theft task force working out of the Atlanta field office. He had the kind of voice that made you sit down, even if you were already sitting. Measured, controlled, careful. He asked me to walk him through everything from the beginning. So I did. The workshop, Brenda's behavior, the inspection attempts, the locksmith, the power shutoff, the trail cam, the carriers, the footage angles, the backup system. When I finished, he said, "Mr. Thorne, I need you to do 3 things." I grabbed a pen. First, do not confront your neighbors. Second, do not alter your visible routine in any way. Third, keep every camera running and back up everything to a separate location. I asked for how long. He said, "Until I tell you otherwise." So that's what I did. I acted normal, went to work, came home, worked on the Camaro every evening, waved at Brenda when I saw her, and she waved back with that same brittle little queen smile, not realizing the ground under her was already starting to shift. Clay helped me expand coverage. We hid one camera inside a ceramic planter on my porch aimed toward the street, another inside a dummy birdhouse on the fence line with a sight line toward the Callaway garage entrance. Between those, the original workshop cameras, the back gate coverage, and the trail cam, I had 7 visual angles. Every week I backed up the footage twice. One copy to a fireproof safe bolted into the workshop floor. one encrypted copy to cloud storage, and I kept a handwritten log in a composition notebook at work. Date, time, carrier description, direction, number of visible vehicles. Agent Whitfield called once a week. Short conversations, 3 minutes, usually less. Anything new? Yes. Camera still operational? Yes. Keep going. Meanwhile, the Camaro was getting closer to done. I rebuilt the engine, mounted new exhaust headers, rewired sections of the dash, fitted the interior, block sanded the body until every panel felt like it had been carved from a single piece of steel. The Hugger orange paint sat on a shelf, waiting for the right day. Nora used to say the best part of building anything was the last 10%. That moment where it stopped looking like a project and started looking like a promise being kept. I was in that last 10%. But Brenda was too, and desperate people make louder mistakes. Attempt number 6 came through a 16-year-old boy named Tyler Poole. Tyler lived 4 houses down with his mother, who worked nights at the hospital in Cumming. He cut lawns in the summer. Good kid. Brenda found the gap between good kid and single mother needs money and exploited it. I was in the workshop changing fuel lines when I checked the porch camera feed on my phone and saw Tyler inside my garage. He was scanning the wall where I kept my key rack. Then he reached for the ring with the workshop keys on it. I stepped into the doorway and said his name. He froze. Absolutely froze. The keys jingled in his hand, and his face fell apart instantly. He started crying before I even got fully into the garage. I took the key ring gently and asked him to sit down. It came out in pieces. Brenda had told him I owed HOA fines. She told him I wouldn't be home. She said she needed the workshop keys for an appraisal. She offered him $200 to take them. $200. That was what getting into my workshop was worth to her. That was what a teenager's future and clean record were worth to her. I didn't call the police on Tyler. I drove him home, spoke to his mother, told her I wasn't pressing charges because the adult in that equation was the real criminal. Then, I reported it to Agent Whitfield. He listened and said, "She's accelerating. That's good for us. Bad for your blood pressure, but good for us." Then Brenda made her biggest local move. She called an emergency HOA board meeting and pushed to place a $14,000 lien on my property for unpaid compliance fines. Now, if you've never had an HOA threaten a lien, let me tell you what that's designed to do. It's not just paperwork, it's psychological warfare. They want the words foreclosure, enforcement, and legal action floating around in your head until you panic and comply. But fabricated fines based on fake violations don't become real just because someone prints them on official paper. The problem is most homeowners don't know that. Most homeowners see legal language and assume they're already losing. I didn't panic, but I did lawyer up. My attorney was a property litigation guy out of Alpharetta named Brennan. Sharp, calm, and exactly the kind of person you want writing letters to people who mistake intimidation for authority. Before Brennan even responded, something else happened. Tammy Sloan, the HOA board secretary, quietly told Clay that the vote Brenda claimed to have won wasn't the vote that actually happened. According to the official meeting minutes, the board approved the lien 4-1. According to Tammy, she voted no. Another member voted no. Brenda simply changed the numbers in the record. That's the thing about bullies who go unchecked long enough. Eventually, they stop hiding the fraud because they start believing no one will ever challenge it. Brenda also launched a whisper campaign. She told neighbors I was running something suspicious out of my workshop. She implied I might be storing drugs. Told one family she'd seen strange people coming and going from my property at night, which would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating, because the only people moving inventory in the middle of the night were at her house. But lies don't have to make sense when they come from authority. They just have to make people uncomfortable. Some neighbors stopped waving. One mother pulled her son inside when she saw me checking the mail, and that stung more than I expected. Money you can fight. Fines you can fight. Liens you can fight. But watching normal people start to look at you like you're unsafe because a manipulative liar got there first, that lands somewhere different. Still, I stayed quiet, documented everything, let Brennan do the talking. He sent Brenda's attorneys a 12-page response package that included the county permit, the covenants, the inspection report, the open records response tracing the complaint back to the HOA account, the sheriff's report on the locksmith incident, the utility fraud record, and a survey confirming the workshop sat entirely within my property lines. He ended with a line I still appreciate. Any further action based on fabricated violations will be met with counterclaims for abuse of process, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and full recovery of fees and costs. Brenda's law firm withdrew from the matter 2 weeks later. Apparently, even they had limits. That should have ended it. But by then, Brenda wasn't trying to win. She was trying to survive. And people in that mindset do reckless things. The final move came when she distributed flyers to every mailbox in Ridgeline Estates. Emergency homeowners meeting, Thursday, 7 p.m. Topic: immediate vote on structural compliance enforcement. Protect your property values. Protect your children. Protect your children. From my workshop, that was the line. And when I read it standing in my driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt since all of this began. Calm. Not fear. Not rage. Just calm. Because by then, I knew something she didn't. That same evening, Agent Whitfield called. Not the usual 3-minute check-in. This call lasted 11 minutes. He said, "Mr. Thorne, we've completed the investigation." Then he told me they had confirmed stolen vehicles entering and leaving the Callaway property. VN matches on 47 stolen vehicles across 6 states. Financial records linking Callaway Premier Motors to a multi-state stolen vehicle distribution network. Search warrant approved. I asked when. He said, Thursday evening. I looked at the flyer still sitting on my kitchen table. What time? I asked. 7. Then there was a pause, and Whitfield said, "That timing works for us." I hung up, walked out to the workshop, and stood in front of the Camaro. It was fully assembled for the first time in decades. Engine in, interior done, glass installed, chrome polished. The only thing left was paint. I opened one of the cans of Hugger Orange and stirred it slowly. That color was electric, alive. It looked like bottled sunlight. "Almost there, Nora," I said. Then I put the lid back on, shut off the lights, and went inside to iron a shirt. The Ridgeline Estates Community Center was a converted ranch house near the entrance to the subdivision. Fluorescent lighting, stucco walls, folding chairs that had seen too many committee meetings and not enough mercy. By 6:45, the room was full. Neighbors in every chair. People standing along the walls, whispers everywhere. Brenda was dressed for victory. White blazer, pressed slacks, hair perfect. Laptop hooked to a projector. The title slide on the screen read, Ridgeline Estates, Protecting Our Community Standards. Under it was a photo of my workshop. Dwayne sat in the front row in a sport coat that didn't fit, and an expression that suggested he'd never been told no by anyone who expected to keep breathing comfortably afterward. I walked in at 6:55 and took a seat in the back. Clay was already there. He gave me a slight nod. I returned it. At exactly 7, Brenda stood and began. She was good, I'll give her that. 9 years of rehearsed control. She talked about unauthorized structures, falling property values, community appearance, safety concerns, children. She used the phrase, "for the good of the neighborhood," like it was punctuation. She cited violation numbers that didn't exist, implied hazards already disproven by county inspection, framed my workshop like it was some kind of threat crouching behind suburban shrubbery waiting to attack resale values. Then she said, "I'm asking the board to vote tonight. This structure comes down within 30 days, or we proceed with full legal enforcement." She scanned the room. A few people nodded automatically, the way people nod when they've been trained for years to accept somebody else's version of reality first. Then she said, "Does anyone have questions?" I raised my hand. She saw me. Her smile tightened. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "go ahead." I stood and asked the only question that mattered. "Are you planning to present evidence of an actual covenant violation?" I said, "or are we voting based on your personal opinion?" The room went still. Brenda opened her mouth, and the back door opened. Special Agent Whitfield stepped in first. Dark suit, badge visible, face unreadable. 4 more agents followed in FBI windbreakers. Deputy Jennings came in behind them in full uniform. Every single head in that room turned. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead so loudly it felt like they were the only thing still moving. Whitfield walked straight to the front of the room and stopped a few feet from Brenda. Then he said the 6 words that ended her reign. "Brenda Calloway, Dwayne Calloway, FBI." He held up the warrant. "We have a federal search warrant for your property at 412 Ridgeline Drive. You are requested to accompany us. You have the right to remain silent." For a second, nobody moved. Brenda's hand was still resting on the laptop. The projector still cast the words, "Community Standards," across the wall behind her. Dwayne stood halfway, like maybe he was considering making a run for the side exit. One of the agents stepped into position and said, "Sit down, Mr. Calloway." He sat. Whitfield turned to the room and addressed the neighbors. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. We are executing a federal search warrant related to an ongoing investigation into interstate transportation of stolen motor vehicles. We have recovered approximately 50 stolen vehicles from the Calloway property. Charges related to VIN tampering, fraud, conspiracy, and other offenses are pending." You could feel the room physically change, like all the oxygen had been sucked out and replaced with shock. This woman had spent years telling people whose trash cans were too visible and whose flower beds weren't symmetrical enough. And now the FBI was standing in front of her saying she'd been helping run a stolen vehicle ring out of her garage. I stood up. My voice, when it came out, was steady. "For the record," I said, "she didn't want my workshop inspected. She wanted my camera footage destroyed. 7 attempts. That's what this was always about." Brenda looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she had absolutely nothing to say. An agent stepped behind her and cuffed her hands. The click of those cuffs was the loudest sound in the room. Dwayne got cuffed next. Then they were walked down the center aisle, past every neighbor they'd manipulated, intimidated, and lied to. Past the projector still showing a picture of my workshop, past the folding chairs, past the HOA board table, out the front doors, and into a parking lot flashing red and blue with federal vehicles and a local news van already setting up outside. That PowerPoint never got turned off. For several seconds after they were gone, the title slide still glowed on the wall. Protecting our community standards. Nobody in that room missed the irony. 6 weeks later, a federal grand jury indicted Brenda and Dwayne Calloway. The charges were exactly as ugly as you'd expect. Interstate transportation of stolen vehicles, conspiracy to commit VIN tampering, wire fraud, money laundering. The investigation eventually tied the operation back 3 years. Roughly 600 stolen vehicles had moved through that 6-bay garage under cover of darkness, while Brenda played neighborhood monarch in daylight. She also picked up state-level charges of her own: utility fraud for the power shutoff, false reporting, misuse of HOA funds. Because once investigators started pulling records, they found she'd been skimming from the HOA operating account too. About $47,000, routed through a shell LLC that existed mostly on paper and nerve. Dwayne's dealership license was revoked. Calloway Premier Motors turned out to be less of a dealership and more of a laundering front. The IRS opened its own investigation into the finances. Burn houses was seized. The neighborhood, for the first time in years, exhaled. Ridgeline Estates held a special election 2 weeks after the arrest. Clay Burgess won HOA president in a landslide. Tammy Sloan became vice president. Their first official act was to void every illegitimate fine, lien, and compliance notice Brenda had issued. Their second was to start a forensic review of the HOA books, which turned up discrepancies in every annual budget going back years. A week after the election, Clay knocked on my door with 2 coffees in hand. He handed me one and said, "Keep the workshop, Garrett. Hell, build another one if you want." That was the first time I laughed about any of it. Really laughed. I finished painting the Camaro that September. 3 coats of Hugger orange, wet sanded between layers, then clear coat laid down smooth enough to make the whole car look submerged in light. When it cured and I rolled it off the lift, the paint caught the afternoon sun through the workshop door and lit the whole room orange. I stood there a long time, not saying anything, just looking. The first place I drove it was the Forsyth County Fair. I parked it in the classic car row between a restored '57 Chevy and a 1970 GTO Judge. People stopped, took pictures, asked questions. A little boy, maybe 9 years old, looked up at me and said, "Is that a real Camaro?" I smiled and told him it was. Then he said, "My grandma would have loved this car." And I said, "Mine too. So would my wife." That fall, I started the Nora Thorne Memorial Auto Scholarship at Lanier Technical College. $5,000 a year for a student in the automotive technology program who showed financial need and what the application called quiet determination. I paid for it with some of the money I'd saved by doing most of the restoration work myself. The first recipient was a 20-year-old single mom from Dawsonville who wanted to become a diesel mechanic. She cried when she got the letter. I cried when I heard she cried. Funny how grief works. Sometimes it breaks you open. Sometimes, if you stay alive long enough and keep your hands busy and your promises intact, it teaches you where to put the love that no longer has anywhere obvious to go. Some nights I still walk out to the workshop after dark. I turn on the radio. I sit in the folding chair next to the lift, and I look at that Camaro glowing under the LEDs. The shop smells like motor oil, fresh paint, and cedar from the shelves I built after everything settled down. It's quiet now, the way it was always supposed to be, and every time I sit there, I think about how close Brenda came. If I'd panicked, she might have won. If I'd yelled, threatened, or reacted recklessly, she would have used it. If I hadn't documented everything, she could have rewritten the story. That's the real lesson here. Brenda didn't lose because the FBI showed up. The FBI showed up because she spent months escalating against a man who kept records. Every time she pushed, I documented. Every time she lied, I backed it up. Every time she tried something illegal, a camera was running or a report got filed. She thought power would protect her. She thought titles would protect her. She thought people would stay intimidated forever. What she never understood is that control only works until it collides with evidence. And evidence doesn't care who runs the HOA. So if you're ever dealing with your own Brenda, somebody with a little bit of local power and a whole lot of entitlement, remember this. Do not hand them your anger. Do not hand them the outburst they're hoping for. Document everything. Know your governing documents. Keep copies. Save footage. Get reports. Use certified mail. Let the facts do the heavy lifting. Because some people dig their own grave the moment they realize you're not reacting the way they expected. And Brenda dug hers with a clipboard in one hand and a fake violation notice in the other. All she had to do was leave me alone. She couldn't do it. And that's why, on a Thursday night in a fluorescent-lit HOA meeting room, in front of all the neighbors she'd spent 9 years controlling, the woman who called my workshop a threat to the community got walked out in handcuffs while her own PowerPoint still glowed behind her. That workshop is still standing. The Camaro is finished.